Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am Game Master Bloodworth, since this is going to be relevant to a number of game systems. But I'm going to really be focusing this discussion on a debate that's been going on my Discord channel amongst specifically my Castles and Crusades players and myself. And it's really been sparked from the last two sessions of our new Castles and Crusades campaign that resulted in several pretty brutal um, results from the critical hits and fumbles tables that I am using. And so the debate really began not this past Tuesday, but the prior Tuesday, when the thief character in the group, and it's a fairly large party, when the thief character was killed, and he was killed by his own fumble. So he rolled a 1, which is a fumble, and then he rolled a 20, and utilizing the chart, which I'm going to share later, utilizing option 5 of Castles and Crusades critical hits and critical fumbles table, that resulted in an instant death. Now, in AD&D First Edition, I utilized because I used the same chart in AD&D First Edition, so I used Castles and Crusades for AD&D First Edition, and AD&D First Edition has it's not quite like a death save, but it is a system shock save. Try to say that 3 times fast. Um, that's connected to the constitution of the character. And I utilized that throughout the 18 months or so that we were using this particular critical hits chart and fumbles chart. And throughout the entire 18 months that we were playing, we only had one character death, one true character death, that was resolved with a raise dead spell, but the fact is that one character died out of 29 potential deaths that occurred over 108 sessions. So if you want to do the math on that, it was roughly, 27% of our sessions had a potential of a character death. So it was not a light spirited campaign. There were many challenges that the player characters faced, and we learned in that system that with a large group of player characters, and we had as many as 10 at one point, and then it dropped down to about 7 to 8. They're facing a lot of potential low level, so low hit die creatures oftentimes, and they get a lot of opportunities to roll a 20. If you're fighting 20 kobolds, those 20 kobolds have 20 opportunities per round of rolling critical hits. They also have the same amount of time of rolling fumbles as well, and that's going to play a little bit in the scenario from 2 weeks ago. But so my players came to realize that there is the negative consequence of having such a large party, and that is because you're going to be facing large numbers of kind of throwaway mobs. I'll use the video game term for them. Apologies for anyone that gets offended by that, but it's a reality of the thing. Is that the more that you're fighting, the more that the higher the chance of them rolling those crits. Last Tuesday, not this past, but the prior Tuesday, the thief character in the group died. He fumbled. He rolled a 1, followed by a 20. And Castles and Crusades doesn't have that kind of a saving throw. So what I did was, I said, I'm going to let you make a Constitution check with a challenge level of a 3, which means that you'd make your Constitution check. You would apply your level, and you would apply your any modifier, con check modifier that you'd have, and your target number is a 12, and so you're going to have a -3 to that roll to begin with. So you'd have to roll a 15, and then you would apply your modifiers. So it would potentially be at least a 14, and potentially even lower. And then he made his D20 roll, and he failed it. So his character died. And that's when the discussion started happening. Oh, it's a it's a tough thing to lose a character, even in the first session. And I think that was partly the issue as well. It was the first session and his very first attack roll, and he killed himself. So I think it was more so, or at least partially, that particular issue that became a real glaring point. It was like, wow, this is a pretty severe system. So I created the saving throw that he would get for it, and like I said, he failed it, and so we moved on. We went into session now during that same combat. I'm sorry, during that same situation that they were in. Two of the ruffians that they were fighting did exactly the same thing. Both are back to back. I mean, I rolled a 1 followed by a 20, a 1 followed by a 20 for them. And some of them killed themselves just in the combat. And it was a big, everyone's laughing and having a funny laugh at the fact that, two of them killed themselves. And we were able to embellish, how exactly it occurred. It was the, shattering of like a ceiling, what do you call those? A skylight kind of thing, and it shattered down and killed them. So so that was the first session, and immediately we started talking about, well, you know what, this is pretty tough and everything. And I was like, well, this is why I created the saving throw, is to give you a chance if you do that. And we moved on. We go to the second session, and the second session was a very brutal combat, and they were facing, and I'm going to save this for when we do the recap of it too, but I'm just going to go in very brief detail. The characters were facing, the player party was facing these like feral goblins that attack with just their claw attacks, and so they would get their 2 claw attacks, and if they landed both, then they would go in for a bite, so it was potentially 3 attacks in a combat round, but they certainly had the 2 claw attacks. And I think that the party, which was 8 player characters, were facing, a maximum at the time was 5 goblins at the time. And so those 5 goblins were getting 10 attack rolls. And the party was certainly taking a lot of incoming rolls, and there were several critical hits and a couple fumbles thrown in there as well, on the part of the goblins. And so, and I believe one of them, I'd have to refresh my memory, I think one of them killed itself as well. So, but one of the player characters had actually been severely injured with a critical hit, and it severed his limb. All right. Now, the party had, several healers. They were able to stop his bleeding. He survived ultimately, but he took a critical hit that that severed off his limb. And again, the debate about the use of this chart came into play, and this is where, the question was, well, why do we even need this? All right, and I'm going to read you one of my responses to it, and it certainly is a philosophy that I have, and it gets to this real point of why I think you should have critical hits, fumbles, and instant death in your TTRPG. And so I'm going to shift in. I'm going to talk about that first. So this was one of my responses on Discord, and I'm not going to share it because I don't want to share the other names around it, but I'm just going to read it to you. So the question was being able to move the fumble and crit results from the BTH doesn't explain why the role has to exist in the first place. So, and I'm going to get into detail what I'm using BTH for. Um, I responded, this is an easy question to answer. The crit fumble system exists because of the philosophy that no matter how skilled, experienced, or armored a character is, he or she can still fail, can still succeed even against 95% odds against him, and no matter how meek an opponent is, it can kill a giant. This is the core of heroic fantasy. All right, and that is my honest belief, is that there, anytime that your player character is going into combat, I don't care what level they are, I don't care what they're facing, they have to have in their mindset that, this could be my very last combat. I can be killed by the peasant with a pitchfork. Even though I am a knight level 12, with a lordly title and all of that, I can get killed. Um, David and Goliath kind of a an issue here, right? And so this is what I think is the essence of the critical hits and fumbles and instant deaths are in the game. I think that clearly answers that question: why do we need it to begin with? So, and so that's my answer, and that will forever be my answer, just to be very, very clear. Now, I did come up with several tweaks to the system, so several homebrews that I think does address some of the concerns and legitimate concerns that that my players had, and perhaps other players will have as well. So let me shift over to the actual system that I'm using, and then I will discuss it further. So I am going to shift here, and so this is the chart that I'm using. I am using option 5 of the critical hits for Castles and Crusades. Now, Castles and Crusades, I'll go back. So option 1 is a very simple, you do max damage and you add a d4 plus your strength modifier. All right. Now, when I'm looking at what my players experienced in that one combat, this would have probably resulted in more character deaths than what occurred. Certainly in the second combat, it would have it would have made each of those claw attacks between 5 and 8 points of damage per hit, and that's more than enough to kill most of the player characters in the party who don't have 8 or more hit points, and that second attack is coming even if the first attack already dropped them. In other words, the second attack is basically happening simultaneously, and so if that hit, that would have further pushed them into, into the negatives, and likely, like I said, beyond -10 would have been killer for them. Option 2, does the same thing. Any pluses or bonuses attached to bonuses, the character's BTH in the case of ranged weapons. So this is just a slightly different system where the character makes a strength attribute check to the character's BTH added. CL is equal to the level of the hit die of the target. Um, this allows for a further attribute check. Um, so this is kind of like the let's reaffirm the roll. It's a second roll beyond the action roll, and I wasn't going to go with that. I don't want to add more dice rolling just to determine if something happened. I'd rather say, we already rolled 2 die to see if something happened. I'm not rolling a third die unless it's a critical, unless it's an instant death. I wasn't creating another roll to confirm it once again. Option 3, um, the attacker is allowed to make an additional attack roll. That's if they make a critical hit, they get to roll a second time to make another attack on top of that. Again, I don't want to really create a system where or utilize a system where you're making multiple rolls. The Roadhouse rules are defined by more brutal in nature, and so again, thus a natural 20 with a +1 longsword and +2 strength bonus would deal 2d8 damage +6. Again, if we start doing the multiplication system here, it would have turned out to be much more dangerous, I think, for my player characters. So this is the system I actually use. I use option 5, whose desired slightly more complex effects from the combat round, and the table below is used as a critical hit or fumble, right? And if you're looking at this chart, it's a D20 chart, and basically the instant deaths happen at 19 and 20 for both critical hits and for fumbles, right? So they both include instant deaths, which I already modified, giving player characters a saving throw, if you would. Now, some of these others do include death after time, though, but that gives the players the chance to respond and to heal their opponents in combat, which they did, in that second battle for sure. They were applying first aid and such, and so they were definitely, or bandaging works as well. So they were definitely getting in there and preventing anyone from dying from the loss of blood during the combat as well. Now, the modification that I came up with, all right, and I am going to switch screens here and double check to make sure that we're on the right screen. So I want to take a look at the barbarian and try to remember that chart that we were just looking at, and the BTH system. So I want you to look at the barbarian here, and you notice that if we take the BTH, so at first level, if you get if you roll a fumble and you roll a 20, at first level, your BTH is not going to impact at all. If you were a fighter, you would get a +1, which you could apply and bring that 20 down to a 19. You're still going to die, but if you roll the 19, which is an instant death result, it would then become an 18. But here with the barbarian, and this is to address the concern that one of my players had, that using a critical hit and critical fumble table for martial classes, in other words, martial classes that have to rely on making 2 hit rolls more so than spellcasters do. This is why I agreed that I needed to tweak the system, and that's where I came up with the idea of this BTH system. So a barbarian at second level will get a +1, which means that they can subtract 1 from the critical hit roll that that's incoming on them, or a critical hit, the critical fumble roll that they did themselves. I could even consider applying this when they make a critical hit, and make them just much more lethal in combat. And maybe that's a discussion we'll have a little bit further with my with my players. Is that, hey, you know what? You could start getting this bonus here, but once a barbarian gets to level 3, which would be a -2 on either of those two charts of incoming critical hit on them or a fumble, um, instant death is no longer a possibility for them. All right, the worst roll that they could possibly have is an 18, which is not a death. It's a severe injury, but it's still not a death. So that's barbarian. When we get to cleric, let's see. So here we are with a bard. So a bard will be exempt from that at level 3 as well. So a bard by level 3 is not going to get there, and a bard gets to level 3 a lot faster than some others as well. So a bard will be, fairly safe from that once they start getting to the higher low levels. Level 3, let's take a look at cleric. So a cleric will be exempt from that by level 4. All right, so a cleric will be protected from it at level 4. And let's get to one of our weakest martial classes. Well, druids won't get there until, oh no, level 4 as well. So druids the same as clerics. Let's get to fighters. As you can see, by second level, they're exempt. All right, because they are getting a BTH all the way through, one for every single level. And I like this idea because, so here, an illusionist is not getting that ability until level 6. All right, so a long, long time before and I'm sure a magic user or a wizard is going to fall in the same category. A knight is level 3. Let's just go through each of them. A monk, level 3, exempt from instant death. A paladin, level 3. So on average, it's going to be level 3. Fighters, level 2. They're exempt. Rangers is going to be level 3 as well. Illusionists were level 6. Clerics were level 4, if I'm remembering right, or maybe level 3. I'll go back and double check. A lot of abilities for rogues would be level 5. All right, so takes a thief quite a much longer time to be exempt from that. And wizards would be level 6, just like illusionists. All right, so the reason why I like this idea is that, and I thought about this idea, was that it makes it fit in with the general game mechanics of adding a modifier rather than an additional roll. Number one. Number two, it makes the martial classes more effective in this, especially if I allow for them to utilize their BTH as far as enhancing their critical attacks as well. So it'll make them much, much more lethal when they do score a critical hit. And that's likely what I'm going to end up doing as well. And so, but it's differentiated amongst the different types of classes based on their martial prowess, right? So, fighters are going to be the highest, followed by all of the rest of the martial classes, but everyone by level two, or three, I should say, everyone by level three is essentially protected from that instant death. And you can conceptualize that as being, well, they're just much more experienced, and so they're able to avoid those kinds of they're able to avoid putting themselves in that kind of a an undefended situation where they're getting that critical strike on them. Now the critical strike is still going to hit them, and it's still going to do some kind of a critical result on them. But it's just not going to be instant death anymore. And the more levels that the player character gains, and that's across all of the classes, then the lesser and lesser effect um, that critical hits and critical fumbles are going to have on them due to their experience. Um, is there still a chance for them to take severe damage? Absolutely. Is there still a chance for at lower levels for that instant death kind of a situation? Yes, absolutely. Um, and if I were to do that and put that system in, then I might very well say that, well, then there is no death save uh, once that's installed, once that is put in. Now, monsters, on the other hand, they don't get the benefits of the BTH towards their fumbles. They're not going to get the BTH benefit towards their critical hits. So they are still going to be at a disadvantage versus player characters. So, I think for the most part, this is going to make that fear of instant death somewhat disappear at higher low levels. So levels three and beyond, that concern is going to be kind of disappear, but the damage effects of the rest of the critical hits table and the critical fumbles table is still going to be there. Can they still lose a limb? Yeah, most likely not until they're beyond like level six or have a plus a plus 4 or 5. I think it's a plus 4. They would need a plus 4 in order to avoid that instant limb loss kind of effect. So I think it's super important. I think it's really important to have this in your game, to include critical hits and fumbles and instant death in your game. You can do as I'm doing, is listen to your players and see, you know, what they're, what they're ultimately willing to accept. But if you have players walk away because they say, I don't want this system that's a basic premise of, what I consider to be heroic fantasy, in the end. And so I'm saying this to my players now as well. Um, if you're going to walk away over this issue, then I really can't do anything, to convince you to stay by making these modifications. Then it's been nice. I wish you would, reconsider. But if you're going to go, I give you best wishes, um, because I think it's fundamental. I think that having critical hits, having fumbles, and having the potential for instant death is fundamental to the core of it being heroic fantasy. And so uh, that's where I'm at. And we're still currently talking and everything, and going through, the various ideas of what to do. One mentioned, well, castles and crusades, and I have to do some further research in this. Um, Castles and Crusades doesn't have a critical hits and fumble chart for Magic, like let's say Dungeon Crawl Classics does. However, it does have a an optional rule where you apply a two hit roll with your spell casting, and it's done as a prime, and so your spell casting base is a 12, and then you'll add your modifiers to it, and then in theory, if you rolled a 20, you'd have a critical success, and then the castle keeper will decide what that looks like. And also, in theory, if you rolled a 1, now you have a fumble, a critical failure, and the castle keeper can come up with some idea of what that's going to look like. I'd rather there be charts for it, and so that's something I'm going to look into and see. Like I have the player's spell book, and I'll see if that has some kind of a change in there, or an optional rule in there. And then I am going to dig once again into the Castle Keeper's Guide, and look for it as well. This leads me to, and I'm going to make a segue into some future videos specifically to Castles and Crusades. I am going to start digging through the Castles and Crusades, the Castle Keeper's Guide, and looking at some of these very specific optional rules that I think will, potentially enhance the idea of creating a heroic fantasy, creating that feel of a heroic fantasy. And so that's something that I am going to certainly look into. And if that does include having a spell casting to hit roll per se, then I will certainly consider using that, and look to see how we can modify the current tables to mesh with to mesh up with magic instead of just weapon types. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and this is something that some of my players have been asking me. So I'll wait until he does this video, and I know I'm about 2 days behind in this video, but just yesterday is when I came up with the idea of the BTH, the basic two hit score, modifying that fumble chart, and I'm glad that this is coming out now at this point, because I had that idea last night, and so now I can actually discuss it and start looking at it and tweaking it out. This is another really important thing for you to do as a game master of any game system. When you're starting something new, there's nothing wrong with finding these holes in what you're doing as far as the game rules are concerned. Sometimes game rules have little holes, and you have these situations that are, I don't want to call them outliers because they can happen more often than that. But there's a difference between edge cases, and this is not an edge case, because rolling 20s and rolling ones are something that happens pretty often. So I would certainly consider taking a look and finding things that you can modify that are just going to work better for your table. But ultimately, stand on your principles as a game master. If it's something that you consider to be a core philosophy of how you're looking to run your table as well. So it's great to compromise, but don't compromise on points that are non-negotiables. Stand by your non-negotiables, and just make sure that your players know that, and hopefully they'll decide to at least give it a try. So I'm hoping that my players will decide, hey, you know what, we're going to give this BTH system a try, and we'll play it for a couple of sessions, and then if I feel the need to tweak it a little bit more, I will. But if I'm like really, really satisfied with the way that it's working, and I think that it's proving to be quite effective, then that's the way we're going to go forward with it. So, as always, thanks for joining this video. I look forward for my players to jump in on this, and you're welcome to make any comments that you want on this on this comment section of this video. I am not going to be like, hey, you know what, you're wrong and now you're out of my game. Absolutely not. You are free to discuss openly your opinions on what we're doing on this particular topic right now, and as well as in the Discord, if you wish to continue, I welcome you to continue, pressing me on things that you might have a disagreement with, and we will talk it out. So, thanks for joining. Hope you enjoyed this video. And remember to like and subscribe and to share this video out there. Like I said, I'm fairly certain this is going to be a big topic because it does come every once in a while. And I'm fairly certain that other game masters out there are probably dabbling with or struggling with this very issue as well. So have a great day. Take care.